Welcome to the Pacific Research Institute's Next Round podcast. I'm Rowena Ichon, COO, and with me as always is Tim Anaya, Vice President of Marketing and Communications. We're just days away from Election Day, so we want to let our listeners know that if they haven't already heard it, check out our pre-election commentary with PRI's special all-star panel. Our guest for this podcast is Norton Rainey, CEO of ACE Scholarships, an organization that focuses on securing financial support for low-income kids to attend great schools. We chat with Norton about their recent education survey of parents and their thoughts on school choice. We also discuss the many advancements of school choice across the states and the further challenges ahead. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Norton, it's great to have you on Next Round podcast to discuss one of the most important issues facing voters this election season, education. Before we dive into the issue and your fascinating new survey, tell our listeners about ACE Scholarships and the work that you do.
Well, thank you for having me on your show. I really appreciate it. And I would agree, there is no more important issue in our country than education in America. And we have a saying at ACE Scholarships that education impacts everything in our country. And we believe that because when you provide a good education to children, you can do anything by empowering families to have true freedom in their lives through their education. But it really is a privilege being here today. I have the honor of serving as CEO of this organization, a role I've had for 22 years. And ACE is entering our 25th year in 2025, which we are absolutely thrilled by. And our mission is quite simple. We really empower low-income parents to put their children into the private K through 12 schools of their choice. And we do this a few ways. We raise money privately. We also raise money through tax credit programs. And we're now proud to be administering an education savings account or ESA program in the state of Utah. We've been in operation since 2000. We have 12 states we serve. 4 of those are tax credit states. 7 we raise private money and 1 being an ESA. And I'm really proud to say that we have over 1,000 partner schools that we work with at this time. But particularly more important for this show is that we're making a difference by serving our children. We've provided over 100,000 scholarships since our founding. And the beauty, our kids do incredibly well. Over 95% will graduate from schools. So it really does go to show that when you empower a kid, regardless of who they are and where they come from, with access to the school that's right for them, they thrive, they flourish. And as Americans, that's something that we can all really be proud of.
So your organization recently conducted a nationwide voter survey about what voters are concerned about on education as the 2024 election rapidly approaches. So let's dive into some of the results. First, you asked voters to rate what they thought was working in public education today. What did they say?
That's a great question. And we wanted to know what our voters thought because here at ACE, we're obviously very biased. We think that education is the number one issue. And we learned some fascinating things. What we learned in particular is that voters generally held moderate views toward public education. But when we asked them to dig deeper and think of specific aspects of public education that are working well, almost a third or 30% of our voters said there were none. In fact, none was the most popular answer to this question, regardless of whether the respondents were parents or had children currently in school. It really is alarming, to be sure, but voters did have some good things to say also. And the next most popular answer was skilled and dedicated teachers and staff coming in at 15%. But something else we thought was really important when we asked these questions, what are the most important issues in our country? And with voters going to the polls right now, they said economy, healthcare, human services, crime, national security, and then education was the next one. And as I briefly mentioned when I had my opening comments, we always say that if you educate the populace, you can eradicate all the other issues in our country. Our economy will be stronger, as will our healthcare system. You're going to have less crime. Our security in our country will be greater. And people will prosper and flourish. And we really believe that is the American way. So we just are really big advocates of education because we know everything starts with education.
Norton, it seems like parents had a big awakening during the COVID-19 pandemic when they saw for the first time during, quote, Zoom school, just what was going on in their children's school. We also know that there are huge learning losses from that time that persist even today. So, in your view, how much of the COVID experience on education is still fueling voter attitudes about public schools today?
Well, as you said, COVID-19 pandemic was a huge wake-up call for parents. It was a crisis. And I do think that it was one of the most, or I would say it was the main catalyst for the major resurgence in school choice and education freedom that we're seeing in our country. Because this was a chance for parents to see what their children were learning in school, or sometimes I like to say a lack of what they were learning during that time. COVID was a time that was very difficult for parents because their kids had no options. They were stuck at home and on their computer. And many schools had a very difficult time actually preparing for their kids to educate them. And in some cases, parents learned that their kids were learning things in school that were really not congruent with their values within their families. And so parents responded. They became quite upset. They went to their school boards. They went to state legislatures and they demanded a change. And we have seen an incredible change in our country in the last 4 years as a result of COVID, as more state legislatures around the country have passed innovative school choice bills like ESAs. ESAs are incredibly innovative because they put the power in the hands of the parents to put their kids in a private school, to homeschool them, put them in micro schools, basically use a pool of money that's allocated to your child to educate your kid as you think is most appropriate. So as tough as COVID was during that time, and we can all agree upon that, it also was a great blessing on the education front because people saw that we need some major and radical reforms in our education system. And we are so excited to see around the country that more than 19 programs have been passed for ESAs around the country. And I think as a whole, more than 32 school choice programs have either been increased in size or passed for the first time in our country. So school choice is really on the rise more than ever. And we're seeing that gap between parents that have choice and between those who do not. Sadly, that continues to widen. Those who have choice are doing really well. Even during COVID, we saw that at ACE firsthand that parents who had their kids in private schools really didn't suffer any learning loss whatsoever. But for those who didn't have choice, it was a really difficult time for them as their kids fell considerably behind in school. And that's not good. American kids, particularly those who are low income, are already significantly behind their peers in other countries around the world. And what COVID did is it just exacerbated those problems.
So there's a big divide, of course, in the 2024 presidential race about many issues, but particularly school choice. You see Donald Trump favoring more expansions of school choice and more federal school choice initiatives, and Kamala Harris largely opposing some. So diving into the results of your poll, where do the voters stand on the issue of school choice?
Well, the first thing I would say is that sadly, we're making education a partisan issue. And there is nothing partisan whatsoever about the education of our children. This should not be a Republican or a Democratic issue. It should be an issue of, is my kid in a quality school? Does my child have access to an education that is equipping them with the tools and skills they need to be successful in this day and time? And I shared some stats earlier. We know that simply is not the case. The sad reality is that it is a partisan issue. And that's not always the case, but along the lines in most states, that really is the case here. We see that most Republicans support school choice, whether it's a public school or a private school or a homeschool. But sadly, many Democrats really believe that governments are the best institution to educate our kids. And so therefore, they're denying kids the very basic right to educate them as they see fit. And that's not good. And our studies are showing that when they don't have choice, they fail miserably and they're not competing. Now, the good news, however, is that we're seeing more Democrats than ever before who are crossing party lines. There are some bold and wonderful leaders that are saying we must educate our kids, and they're saying it's not enough to prohibit them from having choices that are right for them. Now, according to some of our polls, we know that Americans are mostly neutral about school choice, but those who feel strongly are more likely to be positive than negative. They really agree that kids should be provided with school choice. One of our states we operate in, the state of Texas, has been a state that's been heavily divided on choice for many years, including rural districts where, let's be honest, Friday nights really rule the day. And these are communities where they've been somewhat opposed to school choice over the years. For the first time, we're now seeing these communities that are really in favor of school choice, and they want their children to have access to the school that's right for them. But what we know is this. And it's a really simple thing. After 25 years of doing this, and we have so much data to show that, is that the children flourish when they go to the school that's right for them. And in many cases, they do well because in the case of our program, we provide partial tuition scholarships, which means everyone has skin in the game, from the parents, the schools, and ACE scholarships. It's a three-way partnership, and that skin in the game and that investment and commitment to their child's education is really what enables them to succeed and thrive.
So, Norton, following up on this, there's been a long, great debate about creating and expanding school choice programs at the federal level. As someone who's been involved in the school choice movement, what are your thoughts on an expanded school choice agenda in Washington, and how would that work?
Well, the first thing, once again, is I'm just really thrilled in our country about the expansion we're seeing in state legislatures. We are seeing a massive wave of support for choice programs, and that's awesome. I think that foundation that's been laid, and also the proof points showing that choice is working, is what is now leading to a national tax credit program. And in recent weeks, some really exciting news occurred here. It's actually called the Educational Choice for Children Act in our country at a federal level, and it actually made its way through the Ways and Means Committee in Congress. So for the first time ever, we could have a bill that maybe upwards of $10 billion on an annual basis that would provide education choice in all 50 states in our country. This would not be created at a local level in state legislatures. It would be created at a federal level if it makes it through Congress and ultimately signed by the president. That's exciting for our country. And as an organization that manages tax credit programs, it's a beautiful thing. It would actually provide a tax credit to corporations and individuals who pay federal taxes. They cannot claim a credit and allocate that money to programs like ACE scholarships or others around the country that are providing choice. We are enthusiastically supporting this bill. It's exciting because it will be a dollar for dollar tax credit, up to $5,000 for our donors. And here's the best part. We think that an estimated 2 million students would be eligible for this program. So it's a game changer. And we are praying enthusiastically that this goes through. We are putting our support behind it. And there's some very bold leaders around the country that are working on this issue in Congress now. So it's exciting times for our country.
But unfortunately, we've seen here in California, not every state is a fertile ground for school choice expansion. We've seen elected officials here, including Governor Newsom and state lawmakers who are beholden to teachers' unions, in recent years been imposing policy and funding roadblocks that are hindering charter schools and charter school expansion. So what are some strategies that you would suggest for parents in blue states like California to secure the greater school choice options and opportunities they're seeking for their children?
Well, I think the first thing is that when you point out many of these politicians and leaders in blue states or anywhere around the country where they oppose school choice programs, you have to take a look at what these people are doing in their own personal families. And in many cases, they are putting their kids in private schools, yet they're opposing lower income families putting their kids into private schools or charter schools or schools of choice that are right for them. And that's because much of their interest happens to be as a government focused on the teachers' unions and monies that are helping them being funded. So it's a very political issue, unfortunately. And to my point a few minutes ago about the National Tax Credit Program, that is a beautiful way to impact blue states where they're prohibiting school choice. Because created at a federal level, it now ensures that everyone, regardless of it being a red or blue state, has access to a choice program. But there's other things people can do in blue states. They can really get behind their school board elections. School board elections are critical because when you have the right people on boards, they're ensuring that their public schools are incorporating curriculum that is more rigorous, that their hiring practice of teachers are more effective, and the curriculum as a whole is stronger, which is making it better for our children and our communities. So I think that's a really important element there within states that are restricting school choice programs. And you're right, in Colorado, where I'm based, in California, where you are, it's unfortunate to see these programs, and also in many cases, I would say people working against the growth of charter schools. Charter schools have been a wonderful opportunity in the public education system. And sadly, I think you have some people that are trying to restrict their progress more, making it more difficult for charters to be created. But you really can get behind your school elected officials. Everyone needs to be involved, and never take for granted what's going on at your local school board. And of course, your elected officials that you're putting into your state legislatures. Elect people who care. Write letters to those who oppose school choice. Get your parents, get your children, get your school administrators out who believe in choice, who have stories that can actually broadcast those stories at a larger level to influence those states.
So there are so many problems facing traditional public schools today, ranging from parents' concerns that their local schools aren't giving kids the academic foundation needed for a bright future to more basic ones like campus safety. So what does your poll say are the concerns of voters on these topics, and how can expanded school choice make a difference in providing parents and students the safe and quality learning environment that they're seeking?
Well, a couple things really rise to the top when it comes to the greatest concerns. Number one is curriculum. Curriculum is number one at 32% among those that we polled. And interestingly, safety is not too far behind. Our parents are very concerned about the safety of their kids. That was not a surprise to us at ACE. For close to 25 years, we've seen safety being a major reason why parents want their kids in schools. We used to think it was because they wanted to put them into a school that had better academics or a school that had stronger character and faith. Those are important things to our families. But what you have to realize is that for lower income parents, they're trapped in zip codes where their schools are not effective. And in these poor neighborhoods, they are fraught with crime and a lot of issues that riddle these neighborhoods. And because of that, safety is a very real issue for these families. But of course, as I mentioned a minute ago, curriculum is something that people are paying more attention to now because they want to ensure that our kids are being educated. That when you look at stats around our country and you see how the United States is ranking against other countries around the world, we rank 35th in math. We know that our proficiency levels in math and reading are abysmal at lower than 40% in most cases. But when you compare those students who are low income who go to public schools compared to low income students who have access to choice programs, it is a night and day difference with students who have access to choice thriving and doing well. So we're going to continue to turn the heat up there and really showcase all the beautiful data and the stories of our families. Stories like Josiah, who is based in Arkansas, whose mother lost her husband when he was young along with his brothers. And she was faced with a very difficult choice because she wanted her boys to be educated, but she couldn't afford it. And then she checked out Little Rock Christian Academy, where they enthusiastically opened up their arms and they said, "We want your son to be here." And Josiah's story is one like the thousands of families we support currently in ACE, where you take them from an environment where they're not thriving to putting them in a great school where they now flourish and they're doing well academically, socially. And in Josiah's case, he's now in college and he's majoring in, I believe, computer science, and he's well on his way to having a wonderful career. So choice is a beautiful thing. Choice is something that is great for our children, but it's even better for America. And it's what enables us to be the most competitive country in the world. So we need to really get behind it more than ever and really ensure that we're doing all we can to open up the doors for all families.
Now, PRI conducts its own national survey each year, measuring voter attitudes on both their local schools and their local school boards. So in our results this year, we found that just 4 in 10 voters gave their own local school boards a positive rating, while in contrast, 52% rated their local schools as being excellent or good. So what are your thoughts on these findings, and how do they reconcile with what you found in your own survey?
Well, our polls did not measure attitudes to our school choice board specifically, but I'm not surprised at these findings. Going back to COVID, it became clear that a lot of school boards really failed their students, and parents are still alert to that fact. Our poll did find that K through 12 public school parents were significantly more satisfied when evaluating their own children's public schools rather than public schools generally. Still, only 51% of K through 12 parents were satisfied with public schools in their area, similar to your poll that you conducted. There are a lot of great public schools that work for many students, but that doesn't mean that we should have more options. It doesn't mean that one size fits all. I was personally very fortunate to go to a good public school, but I also came from a middle income family where in my zip code, we had better public schools. That simply is not the case for all parents in this country. In fact, their students are trapped in schools where they barely receive a passing grade, but that's the only choice they have. And because of that, our poor children have no other alternatives. So the work we're doing at ACE, the work that others are doing, is vitally critical and more important than ever in our country.
Outside of California, school choice has made great headway over the past 2 or 3 years, with many states enacting limited or stronger school choice programs. So what are the continuing challenges to providing even greater school choice across the country?
Well, you're right. There are many myths out there about school choice. And the biggest one I hear is that if we have more school choice, it's going to bankrupt our public education system. And that is simply not the case. In fact, as we've seen choice programs flourish around the country, we've actually seen public schools improve as well. And I'll give you a couple examples. In the state of Indiana and Florida, their public school systems both ranked well beyond 20th. And when they pass their choice programs, both of these states now are ranked in the top 5 in the country in public education. We are big believers in competition, and that when you have competition, that all boats rise and they do better. So choice is a beautiful thing here, and it doesn't bankrupt our public schools. In fact, if anything, funding for public schools has increased over the years. You never see a decline in funding for a public school system. But what you do see is improvement. You see improvement across the board for children, for schools, for states, for our economy, for our country. Everyone across the board is improving. And so the myth that people will continue using that we're bankrupting a system, it really is not true. And that's why we continue to flourish, and that's why we continue pushing for more opportunities around our country.
So finally, as we close, we call our podcast Next Round because of PRI's proximity to wine country and our love of discussing public policy issues over a great glass of California wine. So what wine, beer, cocktail, or other beverage are you enjoying to celebrate the release of your very informative new survey?
Oh my goodness. Well, I love your podcast because of the access to just a great glass of wine or beer or whatever it may be. Well, I got to say two things. One is we have two board members who are involved in the liquor industry. One is Don and Susie Law, that have this amazing vineyard in Paso Robles, California called Law Estates. I love their wine, and it's highly rated. So if I was going to have any glass of wine, I got to pick Don and Susie Law's wine. And if I'm going to have a beer, it's going to be from Coors. The Coors family have been tremendous supporters of free markets and school choice, and they're based in Denver. And so it's hard to go wrong with a great Coors beer on a hot day as well. But those would be my two choices.
Absolutely. The Coors Foundation is a supporter of PRI as well. Thank you so much, Norton.
Thank you very much. Keep up the great work.
If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. And when you're on these platforms, don't forget to give us a big 5 stars. If you don't subscribe to any of these, you can still listen on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/Pacific Research 1. That's the number 1. Thanks for listening. I'm Rowena Ichon. Hope you'll come back again for Next Round with PRI.